Hello and welcome to another episode of Design Divas. I am Pavitra and this is Sheila from Shilpa Architects, Planners and Designers in Chennai. And we're here to talk today about all things architecture, sustainability and things that make us architectural, I guess. So today's topic is about spaces in architecture and the emotions that you kind of feel by being in different spaces. And I think given that our collective experience totals about 75 years.
Oh my God.
Yes, so we talk about that, we want to talk about how the design of spaces has kind of influenced our practice and our design thinking. So let's get started. So Sheila ma'am, going back to some of your very first projects where you think that the feeling of emotion and space. I mean, nowadays there is this word of sensory architecture, which is quite big, and everything is about a sensation or an experience. What is your first experience with dealing with architecture of this type?
When we designed a school, we got a Design Share Award from the US. This was many years ago.
Okay.
But it was then that I kind of put all my thoughts into what it meant to build a school environment. For example, schools typically have a corridor.
Right.
And children, when they are taken to school, maybe all of 4 or 5 years old, and the corridors are not in scale with them at all.
Right.
So, they feel very intimidated. That's what happened to me when I first went to school.
Right. Obviously drawing on memory and your own nostalgia.
And our own learning. And but a school has to cater to, what the staff needs, what the students need, what the parents need, what the management needs. So what a child needs is, the playfulness, extension of a play area and, learning, being inquisitive, etc. And then the parent wants something which is safe, and the staff wants something which, makes their work easier.
Right.
So it's very
varied, yeah.
Very varied. So that I learned. And when we did this school for the Design Share Award, we did completely away with corridors. So that was my first thing. Take out the corridors.
Right.
These long drawn corridors where you go walking across.
Right, and then there is a safety aspect, like you rightly said, and then many schools grill that corridor, and then it becomes, something else.
Yeah, it becomes a terrible space. So we did little petals, because this is where children blossom into individuals. So the petal, the hibiscus petal was an inspiration for the form. And we did the classroom like a petal.
Right.
So it was all centered around a courtyard. And these classrooms had automatic focus. So the narrower part of the petal was where the teacher was, and the wider part is where the children would sit around. So it gave an automatic focus into where the teacher is. And then we worked on sound, we worked on light, we worked on texture, we worked on materials.
Right,
it was completely out of brick, and it was done with brick corbelling. So it was a very cool, beautiful classroom where the children could also connect with the outside.
Right.
So it's not just seeing the teacher, but if a respite is required. And we got an award.
The recognition for it, of course.
And that was really nice because it came from the US, and for us at that time, maybe in the early 1980s, it was something very, very important to us.
Very nice. Well, I think taking off from that conversation of designing schools and making them sensory environments, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of our more recent projects where we worked again on a school in Tayur and just outside of Chennai. And the sensory aspect here was brought in by, the building was very straightforward. We were obviously working on a budget. So it was a simple frame structure. But where we brought in that artistry and we brought in that kind of feeling of magic was to be able to take the kids along an experiential ramp.
Correct.
That connects to the other levels. And the building of this ramp was done with a rammed earth material because we wanted them to feel like they were very connected to nature. And also, you know, building in things like small reading circles and reading areas into this ramp kind of makes it an experience of getting from one place to
And
another. So
inquisitive, yeah.
it almost takes the idea of a corridor and then debunks it in a very different way, in the sense it's a celebration or it's a place of fun. And for some reason, kids love ramps.
Yeah.
There's this feeling of it being kind of like an extension of a slide. So there's always like a sense of
they run up and
happy
down,
movement around a ramp. So I think that was something that
They
we were
feel
really
free.
able to build.
Yeah.
And of course, the whole focus was around an existing tree. So we did manage to bring in a little sustainability aspect of saving the tree as well. So I think there is a lot of learning
Absolutely.
and that came in from like the late 80s, but it still carries through in our thread and the way we continue thinking about things.
I mean, while detailing schools, I think this is so important because it's the learning environment for children, and as I told you, where they learn so much,
right,
in classroom, out of the classroom, with friends, social, how they have to behave with each other. So this is where they blossom.
This same topic, and going into another perhaps design exploration of how you feel spaces have influenced architecture. I know that coming from a classical dance background, a lot of your research has been on the temple architecture and the kind of emotions that temples tend to evoke in people. The sort of feeling of humble piety that you kind of feel just because you're in front of a form that is so overwhelming. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about your experience with history, temples, architecture and feelings?
I've always felt very differently at different temples. So, I wanted to in fact do a continuing study on how the temple evokes a certain feeling in you. I called it the raga, the bhava and the talam of the temple.
Lovely.
That is where it is the music, the rhythm and the emotion of the temple. So, but I was fortunate enough in, making this really work as a study when I did this little movie in memory of my mother, who was so focused on, teaching me the arts.
Right.
So I thought, like, when I lost her, I did it as an ode to her. So, this was a temple, which is the Bargadishwara temple, which is very different from other temples.
The Tanjavur Brihadishwara temple.
Yeah, the Bargadishwara temple. When you look at the temple, the awe, the scale, the magnanimity of it strikes you, and it makes you feel very humble and insignificant and bow to the Lord. Whereas, for example, in Konarak, if you go to the Konarak temple is so sensuous, and the friezes are all horizontal and carved
and accessible
and touchable to us. So when we look at it, we also kind of
you vibe with
you sync with the kind of emotion that it portrays. And similarly, the Thiruvananthapuram temple also, it is supine, the Lord is supine, and then there is a long walk. The horizontality of it is so obvious, and you feel calm, and that shantam which comes in is something which is so temples for us are great teaching spaces,
right,
where of what emotion can be kindled in the perceiver through the architecture.
Right. So taking away from Sheila ma'am's kind of research oriented breakdown of the various temple architectural styles and the emotions that they tend to evoke, I wanted to talk a little bit about our own experience with designing of a very modern,
contemporary
temple. I think what we did in this particular structure was, this is a Sai Baba temple, so it didn't have a very strong religious particularly tilt, but it was more spiritual. And the whole idea was to try and create a space which was very tranquil and very spiritual, very meditative. And we were also working with, certain aspects of numbers, of mathematics.
Sacred
And
geometry.
and of, so we went in for quite a very interesting form-based exploration. And we knew that we had to work with a particular number because that was the number that was assigned by the astrology of the site. And therefore we came up with a 11-sided kind of a temple figure.
That was really
which
difficult.
was, which was a series of algorithmic outputs from a very high computationally aided kind of a
Absolutely.
process. But the end result was something that felt so simple, yet so complicated.
And so beautiful.
And so airy and light, while it was built in with all the aspects of location, of lighting, of understanding at what time the Sai Baba statue is going to get light, where you can have shaded spots during the day, as well as, building up that entire spiritual path of what that journey would be like to access this final sanctum.
Actually walking through, the straight vista that it created, and then at the end of the vista you have this form,
Yeah.
which is jewel-like,
Yeah.
with Baba sitting inside.
Right.
I think was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of my favorite
It was almost
buildings.
poetic, yes. I think so. I think that's been one of our favorite projects. So all this time we sat and talked about, high emotions of feeling good, or feeling, calm, or feeling pious. But we also have had the opportunity in our experience to design a couple of different projects where we had to design for people that were not necessarily in the best emotional state of mind.
Absolutely.
And I would like you to talk a little bit more about that approach versus this, and
Absolutely.
how it sort of is different.
Yeah, I think, Pavitra, the crematoriums that we designed,
Right.
When people are, look for support and have lost somebody dear to them,
Right.
and then they go through, go for the cremation.
A very
and
emotional
it's a
process.
very emotional period.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, it is something which has to be clean and hygienic, and almost take you to a spiritual realm rather than, take it to a mundane place which is filthy and,
Correct. And I think in India, technically, there are lots of these, typically these areas which tend to be
Yeah.
quite badly maintained, and we were also looking at
Absolutely.
ease of maintenance while looking at an architectural style that will
Absolutely.
support a lot of burning, a lot of kind of waste and things like that.
And also the emotion generally is, people wailing, there are different families together, so you don't even have the privacy to mourn in peace.
I think when we got this project for redesigning or sort of refurbishment of Swargadwar in Puri, the site itself is a lot of it's a very it's got a lot of feeling towards it, because a lot of people in the state of Orissa actually go to this particular location because it's on the beach, and it is supposed to be Swargadwar, which means you're directly accessing heaven. So people kind of aspire to be cremated here, and it tends to be very, very crowded. And given that this was being done in a remote location, we were also trying to look at precast architecture. So which meant that, a lot of these forms had to be modularized and turned into something where it could be precast at a factory site and then just quickly assembled on site, because the site itself could not have a lot of downtime, because it is a working
crematorium.
ghat. So what we had to do is we kind of worked with the terrain, the fact that it was on a slope, and we started all the way at the bottom and started bringing in our little modules. And the modules, like you rightly talked about privacy, were angled in a way in which we made the best of the breeze direction in order to help the fire, because these are all naturally burnt. It's not an
electric.
Incinerator. Yeah. So to be able to bring in the sea breeze to help expedite the burning process, I think this was the first time we had kind of, worked on the engineering of something like that. And of course, working with, trying to keep spaces that could offer some amount of privacy during the waiting time, to be able to offer those families to be able to have that privacy.
Yeah.
Apart from which, obviously, the administrative processes and all were quite well marked. It was the first time we had brought in for the state a morgue where we could actually store and wait in case there was a waiting time and things like that.
Quite an elaborate.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that project is also something that's kind of done really well in that space.
Yeah, you've not only done that, we've also done things for animals, right?
Yeah, I mean.
So why don't you talk about that?
Absolutely. I think this is a very, very near to my heart sort of a project. I think when the city of Chennai was looking at coming up with new centers for the animal birth control program to be able to look at the sterilization, the kind of equations that we were drawing is, how do we turn this into a process where it's not limited to just 3 surgeries a day, which is what is currently happening, but actually turns into something that is like, multiple surgeries a day. And then we kind of were very inspired by the Arvind Eye Hospital model and looked at what a larger OT would be to be able to have that. But the entire focus of this project came in from the experience of the dog. Yeah, personally, I'm quite an animal lover. I'm kind of very, very familiar with this space of, what happens when you go out to catch the dog, what stress it is under, and therefore after the operation, what it needs. So our design of, I think, the kennel and the recuperation spaces was what I think I can say I'm really proud of. Yeah. And the idea of, coming up with open to sky kennels so that the dogs that are actually recovering have the access to be able to see the sky. Because always we talk about, even in hospital environments, to be able to see nature and be connected outwards helps with the recovery. And this is something we were trying to do. We were trying to get these dogs to recover and go back out onto the streets in 2 to 3 days instead of the usual 5 to 7 days. So, architecture that way has the potential to be woven in to kind of help these processes.
And to respond to all these inner needs of human beings and animals.
That's right. I think today has been a very exciting and emotional discussion for us, because I think we've been talking about emotion and architecture and how we've kind of dealt with it in different ways in terms of your feeling, your senses, as well as your overall emotional response to a space, and how we've had to craft different spaces for different a variety of program to do different things to us emotionally. So I think it's been quite a lovely conversation. So thank you, ma'am, for that. So it's a wrap for our version of Design Divas this time. So please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more such content. Thank you.